and a very good morning to you. My name is David Bristow, and I host a travel blog called Travel and Things. Now, with being a non-travel travel writer, I decided to chat to some of my friends in the industry and find out what they're doing to keep themselves busy. And my guest today, and I suppose in a way, the first on this series of In Conversation With, is another DB, and that's David Bristow. David, good morning. Welcome to you.
Peace and love.
For a moment, you took so long, I thought, can he hear me? Firstly, where are you in the world?
Where I live, near Muizenberg in Cape Town, a little place called Marina de Gama.
Now, I've seen pictures that you and Josephine post on a relatively regular basis. The place looks absolutely stunning. And it's almost as if you could go out into the bush in your own backyard, David.
In your own kayak?
That is what, but you're not allowed on the water. So you see, this is a really strange one, because although there will be viewers to this, a lot of people are readers on my blog. So I don't know whether to refer to them as readers or viewers, but for anybody who may be watching this, tell people what it is that you do, David.
I'm still trying to work it out. You know, I've got lots of hats, but and it's funny you should ask. Thank you for asking that question. But I made a living for the past 40 years writing books.
Right.
But I never considered myself a writer. When people say what you do, it sounded so pretentious. And because I haven't written a great novel, to call myself a writer seemed a bit disingenuous, which is not true, but I never felt that I had the gravitas for that, appellation. Especially since when we grew up, there was no job description called writer. So you became other things. And one of the things I became was a journalist.
Right.
And that, by a very circuitous route that wasn't directly related to journalism, I became a writer. So I guess having written something like 30 books, I think I'm entitled to finally be calling myself a writer. But I do a lot of other things.
Like?
Buy old houses and renovate them.
Right.
I'm a specialist tour guide, and I'm a layabout.
In that order, David?
Well...
When you say specialist tour guide, what did you specialize in?
Thank you for asking that question, because it's everything.
I got your script with the questions. That's why I'm asking them.
I'm a specialist generalist, or a generalist specialist, because being a writer, my whole adult life has been researching. So I've researched many, many subjects. And I've also got a few degrees, 3 or 4 when I last counted. So I've got quite good knowledge of quite a wide spread of things that broaches history, geography, culture, politics, architecture, geography, geomorphology, geology, ecology, you name it. I've got a handle on quite a few things. So I don't take people and show them the usual sites. Rather, I'll take them to, and very unexpectedly, I could take them to, off the top of my head, the Natural History Museum in the Gardens.
Right.
And they think, we've come from New York. Why do we want to go and see a Natural History Museum? Well, because it's the easiest place to see rock art. They've got the genuine panels of some rock art that was chiseled out in the Eastern Cape. And an hour later, and they'll be jaw drop and want to hear more. So I could take you to the rocks in Sea Point. They're called the Darwin's rocks, but nobody really understands the full significance of what they're looking at. They often know no story or half the story. Half the story is that Darwin came here on his journey on the Beagle in 1833, and he was stopped in Cape Town for a short sojourn, and he was taken to the rocks where he was shown, where you can see igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary rocks all in the same location.
Okay.
where the igneous has actually metamorphosed the Bockerfeld shales and Malmesbury shales and turned them into a different kind of rock. Well, that's the one story. The other story is where Darwin got one of his great insights. The one was that, which he got mainly on the South American coast, Galapagos, that there was a process of change in nature. It wasn't God-made as we see it today. There had been a succession, a biological succession. So that was the first great insight. But the other great insight, which is often brushed over or not amalgamated into the whole picture, is that he needed time. How much time do you need to succeed, which is a biological term, from a jellyfish to an orangutan? 7,000 years, which was the worldview at the time, was never going to cut it. And it was in Sea Point that it might not have been right there, but I like to say it was. But he got the insight into the geological span of time. Without that, he could never have imagined the full span of evolution. So, who would think to take you there and tell you that story? So that's what I do.
Okay, well, as long as you don't take people to Sea Point now, because there's enough trouble in Sea Point as we speak. But it's interesting you say that, David, because at the end of the day, people seem to think that you need to get out in order to, and I mean, when I say out, I mean out of a city, in order to enjoy whatever it is that you're going to see. Yet there is a lot within our cities that even the inhabitants of the city forget about. I mean, where I live in Linden, there is a monument just down the road from me to the Voortrekkers, which nobody seemed to know about. They're prints of the oxen in the cement up there. And people drive past it on a daily basis going to the local vegetable shop, or used to drive past it on a daily basis. Can't anymore. But it's all those sort of hidden gems. And I'm glad you brought that type of thing up, because I'm sure in a very close proximity to the center of Cape Town, there are plenty of things that you could take people to, literally without going 5 kilometers away from the city center.
Yeah, of course, Cape Town has got a lot more opportunities. Maybe we've got the natural environment of Table Mountain, the marine environment, but also the deeper history where most of the trouble starts.
Right.
And let's say you want to see the winelands. Well, you can go to see the winelands and you see these nice Cape Dutch estates. But they tell a whole different story as well. You go to Groot Constantia, the oldest farm in South Africa. And it's what is it? It's a story of early Dutch East India Company monopoly trading, the first multinational corporation in the world, the slave empires of the world in the 17th and 18th centuries, the owners of Groot Constantia, who go from Simon van der Stel to Willem Adrian van der Stel to Olaf Berg's freed slave wife. For 3 generations, it's owned by freed slaves. And, so there's a hell of a good stories here. But all the people who live in Gauteng now, put up your hands who hasn't been to the cradle of humankind.
True enough. And that's also 45 minutes away.
One of the greatest stories in the world, for me, the greatest story about what's been happening there in the past 20 years under the direction of Professor Lee Berger is mind-blowing stuff. And, so Joburg's got plenty. And the Magaliesburg. Magaliesburg is my spiritual home.
Really? I didn't realize that there were battles fought in that area. I mean, big battles.
Well, which war were we talking about?
You name it, it was fought there.
Well, Magali comes from the name Mohali, who was a North Sotho or Ndebele, whichever chief, who sought refuge there away from the Silikatsi, who was in his own way breaking away from Shaka. And then he got hounded by the Voortrekkers for causing kak around there. And then it becomes a Boer War battle sites, some fairly major engagements up on the Hekpoort area. But then later in the guerrilla phase of the Boer War, if you go towards Hekpoort, there's a blockhouse on it's actually called the Witwatersburg Ridge, which is one before the Magaliesburg. There's an old British blockhouse from that guerrilla phase of the war. So yeah, Joburg got its stories, eh?
But also, we seem to have recently, I think it was last year, and I don't know how far this has been taken, both in Cape Town and in Johannesburg, David, they've discovered underground tunnels. I know in Johannesburg it was, I think, from the post office to Park Station, so that they could take mail and valuables underground without being hijacked. And I think in the center of Cape Town, there are also some underground tunnels that were recently discovered and open to the public.
Yeah, they are stormwater drains. So
Okay.
coming off Table Mountain, there's a lot of water. And initially, and it's such a pity it doesn't happen anymore and it can't be resurrected, the Adderley Street was called the Herengracht, the Gentleman's Canal. And it was a canal all the way down to the waterfront.
Right.
But with the expansion of the city, it got paved over and canalized and disappeared from view. But there are quite a few other ones as well to drain the water off the mountain into the sea. And they're well over man-tall height. And they all encased in dressed stone. They're quite lacquer to meander around. Just as an anecdote, when we were kids, well, not kids, when we were teenagers.
You are still a child, David. What do you mean when we?
We discovered the stormwater drains that you could access from the Zoo Lake, because the Zoo Lake dam wall has got an overflow.
Yep.
And if you swim, if you get into the water and then you slip over the overflow, you get into a stormwater drain system that goes through all the Park suburbs. And we would come out on the stormwater drains in Parkwood and Parkhurst and Parktown North. Okay, where are we now?
I don't know if those are still accessible, because I should imagine that if you go in there the wrong time of the year, you could end up somewhere that you don't want to be.
Well, midsummer thunderstorm particularly. Yeah.
David, we glossed over also your time as editor, because you've done that as well. You've edited at least one magazine.
Several.
Well, I said at least one because I couldn't remember how many.
Yeah. No, my first editing job was not that illustrious, but it was actually a hell of a good, I've always believed in apprenticeships. So when I started journalism, I didn't start, even though I had an honors degree, I started in the works department, hot metal press. So when I started as an editor, I started on technical magazines, and I had an incredible boss. His name was Matthew White, and he was an amazing literate guy. And he used to run a secondhand bookstore in Joburg, in Rosebank, and he was a very, very literate man, and he was very OCD as well. But he taught us how to be, fanatical editors. And I remember the one thing he said: when you're editing or proofreading and you see something that's not quite right somewhere, and it can be in the front or it can be right in the back of your head, but a bell rings. And no matter how faint that bell is, you must pay attention to it, because there's something wrong. You want to carry on reading and go over and get yourself finished, but that bell won't stop. And if you don't pay attention to that bell, you'll never be a good editor or writer for that matter.
Yeah.
So there was a computer magazines in the early days of home computers. But it gave me a hell of a good apprenticeship in the technicalities of editing. So when I joined Getaway about a decade later, I was probably too strict, but I come from an old school. I came from the old school where, apostrophes, they've got a function. And if you don't understand the function, go and get another job. Yeah. So I'm very meticulous in that sense, but I've got a drawback.
And that is?
I'm dyslexic.
Okay.
So I can pay attention, but it's been quite hard. But now, dyslexia is like autism. It's not all or nothing. There's a continuum. And I'm on the early stage of dyslexia, so I can read and write, but I miss stuff.
Okay.
It's still quite a hell of a challenge, and certainly as an editor, it was a hell of a challenge. I've always needed my own good editor, and I currently have a Josephine.
Yeah. I sometimes wish I had a Josephine. I I have a version of Josephine, but my wife, unfortunately, or fortunately, is an academic. So she will read my stuff with an academic eye and then go, why did you say it like this? Explain it to me. And I tried to explain it. She goes, no, but it doesn't make sense. I go, well, it does to me. But now I'm going to take your point there. And if she's ringing bells, then maybe it's wrong.
Yeah.
I shall
Well,
go back
certainly,
to...
you need to pay attention to it.
Yeah,
you need to go back.
Yeah, I will go back to Eat Shoots and Leaves and reread that, because the apostrophe S worried me for the longest time. But having said that, David, doesn't it drive you mad? I wrote an article this morning, and there's a shop in our neighborhood called Millie's. Now, I would have thought that Millie's is named for the owner of the shop, which means it's apostrophe S. But I walked past it this morning just to check, and it's not apostrophe S. So now I'm anguished, because it should, as far as I'm concerned, it should be, but it's not. And it sort of gets my goat.
Gray area. It's a gray area. The official, I don't know if there's a book, but the cartographical conventions of South African maps, the decision was made that name places won't take the apostrophe. So if you look at government printer maps, Richards Bay, Morgan's Bay, they don't have the apostrophe. And that was just a decision made.
There was a lovely story that was from some years ago in England, where an elderly English teacher used to go around and correct incorrect graffiti. And he was eventually arrested because they caught him spraying apostrophes in, or there instead of there, that type of thing. And he would correct them with a red spray marker, with a red spray paint. And he was arrested. I thought it was wonderful.
Brilliant.
David, in your books that you've written, your 30 books to date, is there a theme that runs through them, or are they eclectic? You sort of wake up in the morning and go, I'd like to write a book about rocks, or a book about a horse, or something, and then take it from there?
With one or two exceptions, which I did purely for the money, nature.
Okay.
So currently I'm writing a series that it might be, a never-ending series called Stories from the Veld.
Okay.
Which can bind together lots of different themes. So the first one was the story about a horse that you know so well.
Zulu.
The second one was, so it is a story about a horse, but it's really a story about the African bush.
Yeah.
And if you read that book, you go on a journey into the African bush that the horse would have undertaken itself. Story about a horse that ran away and got lost in the African bush, but survived against unbelievable odds. So I try and take people on that journey into the African bush. The second one in the series was The Game Ranger, the Knife, the Lion, and the Sheep.
He says reaching for his copy.
That one. So people of our age will know that the title comes from the story of Harry Wallater, who killed a lion with his sheath knife. The sheep I won't tell you about on air. Let that be a bait. But it's 20 stories about curious characters, starting with a Khoi maiden named Krotoa, who got employed by the Van Riebeeks to polish their colonial steel. Ended up having a short and tragic life, torn between the Khoi society and the Dutch society, between Christianity and paganism, and died an irreconcilable drunk on Robben Island. So that's one story. And there are 18 others that go through the whole history of South Africa, and it's not white male history. I've tried to tell many other kinds of stories, like the Mujaji, the Rain Queen, Montawasi, was a prophetess, the 14-year-old girl who predicted the rise of the ancestors, and so on. And it's not all white, it's not all male. So I try and spread it as broadly as I can across the panorama of South African history.
David,
the third one.
Sorry, can I interject there for a moment? Because I just want to go back to Harry Wallater. Everybody, I think, knows the story of what happened to him. But there's a nice little addendum to that when he went, I think, to England to tell them about how well their knife had performed. And they were sort of like, well, we can slaughter sheep, you can kill a lion. What the heck?
That's the one. All right, so the one you don't have. Hominids, Hunter-Gatherers and Heroes, which is a unfortunately confusing title, but it's about 20 amazing places in South Africa.
Okay.
But again, I don't try and tell the usual stories that you'll know. So there's no God's Window, and there's no Golden Gate, and there's no Bladder River Canyon, but there is Mapungubwe, and there's Adam's Calendar, which is a strange place. And there's the Joburg War Museum.
Adam's Calendar is attached to a very strange place because Kaapsehoop is peopled by strange people and horses. It's possibly aliens, depends on who you talk to. But it's one of those small town South Africas that haven't really stepped in quite into the 21st century. One foot is still way back in sort of the 1900s, and the other is teetering on the brink of. And I love it. I go there relatively regularly because for me it's only was only a 3-hour trip. Who knows nowadays? But that calendar is very, very interesting because there are a lot of stories around it. People moving rocks to tell, to fit a narrative for them, that type of thing.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, actually, and I hope I do it justice. And the way I try and tackle it is about good science and bad science. So we have a lot of science pouring out in the social media. Anti-vacking and anti-vacking is the first one. Now it's about viruses and spraying bleach up your nose, or like really good medical common sense that we get thrown at us by all these experts. And Adam's Calendar is caught up in that kind of narrative as well, where there's a lot of bullshit that's been promoted by pseudoscience.
Right.
And I won't go too deeply into it, but they really miss the real story, and this is what pisses me off. And the real story is that why couldn't Africans who lived there very happily in times past, if it is stones made to be a calendar, why couldn't it be the local people? Why did it have to be freaking aliens? You know, that's a kind of space-age colonialism of thinking that pisses me off because it's insincere, or it's incorrect on two levels. But anyway, it's a nice place.
Now, did you visit those places to make sure that the stories that you were writing came from first-hand knowledge, or did you just sort of pull research off the internet? And did you visit it in a particular vehicle, or did you just sort of, you know where I'm leading with this?
I did. So, people, let me give you a warning. Unless you
don't try this at home.
A very large workshop, don't buy an old combi and try to renovate it.
But David,
what the hell?
What is so difficult? Don't you watch these renovation programs on Netflix and DSTV, and they build a whole car from scratch in about 13 seconds, and then they sell it for a fortune, and who knows if it even drives around the block? I've never aspired to build a car, but I watch a lot of them in absolute awe, figuring how can they do this and actually get the thing to run and drive in what seems like 2 weeks. And I know how you struggled with your combi.
Yeah, long story. But anyway, I had fun. And I did go around the country in Umkhombe, which the sign on the back, Umkhombe, which means rhinoceros in Xhosa.
Okay.
Which I thought was a great name. And we had a lot of fun. We had quite a few breakdowns.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, it was part of the experience and the journey. And I had a lot of fun going around South Africa on my own, camping, just cruising. You know, I had waypoints, 20 waypoints to visit. It was really like going back 30 years where it was my third combi I've had in my life.
Right.
So it was, It was wonderful. It was a wonderful journey.
I think that people at some particular point need to do, even if it's just a road trip, it doesn't have to be in a combi, but I do believe that they need to do a road trip from point A to point B via X, Y, and Z, just to get in touch with what our country really is. Because I was one of them. I'll put my hand up first to say that if I was going, let's say, Johannesburg to Cape Town, I would get in my car if I was driving, and I would drive until I got to Cape Town. Now there are stops along the way, because the journey is part of the discovery. And if you miss things, like I stood in Springfontein watching the cars hurtle past, standing outside an old Boer pillbox that people knew nothing about. Myself and the owner of the property I was staying at screaming at the passing cars, going, "You stupid people, stop, come and chat to us," type of thing, you know. And I think a lot of that is what you're bringing up in your book or your series of books. And I'm hoping that people, if they can't go on the journey by themselves, that they will use your books as the journey, and that they will read them in vast quantities.
Well, that's a good thought. So I think of the last one, the hominids, hunter-gatherers, and heroes, as being a bucket list.
Okay.
Buy the book, here's the backstory, now go and see the place. Because they all lacquer places, from Cozy Bay, you know, through the Karoo, the Eastern Cape, Wild Coast, Drakensberg. And I'd like to think that almost every one of them is an unexpected place with a deep story. So yeah, it's definitely about journey of the mind, and genuinely a road trip, for sure.
And did you do a lot of research beforehand, or did you just sort of say to your Josephine, "Listen, I'm off. I'll see you at some particular point if I don't break down. I've got 20 waypoints. How I'm going to get there and what I'm actually going to do, or how long I'm going to spend there, I have no idea." Or did you have a finite time plan?
Not finite and neither infinite, because along the way I met people. So I'd have to make arrangements up ahead to meet people. But it was fairly fluid. You know, the thing is, 13 years at Getaway Magazine, and 30 years before that as a hitchhiker, there's just about nowhere in South Africa I haven't been. But one still has to do the research. And you know what? The best story is always talking to people. You pull into a town, you go and you meet the local bartender or the restaurateur, whoever, Tani in the general store, and that's where you find the gems for your stories. So you can't not go.
But you know, David, you say that, and just to go back to Kaapse Hoop, I was sitting in the pub. Not that I'm a drinker, but they serve very nice food in that particular little restaurant in the middle of Kaapse Hoop. And I was chatting. Sorry?
They do indeed.
They do indeed. Nice burgers. So I was chatting to a fellow who looked like he'd sort of just stepped out of the 60s. And while I was talking to him, I got a message from a friend of mine saying, "While you're in Kaapse Hoop, look up like Bob, because he taught my daughter how to ride." And who was I chatting to in the bar while I got the message? I was talking to Bob. Unbeknowingly, because when I said to him, "Excuse me, aren't you Bob?" And he went, "Yeah." I said, "Well, Nikki sends regards." So it was that whole circle, you know, how do you know Nikki, that type of thing. And we had a wonderful evening. He's got some really, really nice stories of the horses and how they came to be there, believe them or not, type of thing. That particular book that you're talking about now, David, are there places that you wanted to put in there and couldn't because you've limited yourself to the 20 tales, or for other reasons that you sort of go, "Oh, if only I'd gone to instead of"?
No, to get to my list of 20 took a long time. I had, a list of 50.
Right.
But then I whipped them down to the story. There had to be a deep backstory that went way beyond anything you can see on the surface. And then it became quite a lot easier. And I'm going to tell you one that is my favorite and least expected, and I often come to tears when I tell the story. It's the Johannesburg War Museum. Now, you wouldn't think that I would include that, but I spent my childhood playing there. It was my wonderland. I was Alice, or Gondwanaland, if you like. Little geological joke. There's a portrait of a man, and unfortunately they've put it in a dark corner next to the mosquito light bomber, but a dark wall. You don't see it easily. And it's a black gentleman with wild hair and his khaki tunic undone, his dog tags around his neck and a grizzled beard. And his name was, or is, Job Masejo, a black man who grew up in Springs, and he worked for the South African Railways. And when the war broke out, he joined the Native Auxiliary Corps. Got captured at Tobruk by the Germans. That was South Africa's most inglorious moment in the Second World War. And while he was while the POWs were loading the German ships into Brook Harbor, he contrived to make a bomb, which he managed to not secrete, that would have been painful, but he secreted amongst the fuel barrels in the German ship, and it blew up. And he managed to escape, get back to South Africa, and he was cited in dispatches for Victoria Cross, but because he was just a native, he was given a lesser commendation. And it's one of the great stories of South Africa.
Yeah.
And in the War Museum itself, there are many other stories like that one can look into. But that is the one that has always haunted me my whole life. But there's a subtext that I'd never told you about, but you brought up the subject of hamburgers.
Right.
It's possible that all of my peregrinations have been precipitated by the search for the perfect hamburger. And I'll go a long way for one. My current champion is in Hogsback.
I haven't been to Hogsback since I was a child. My parents took my sister and I there when we were in our teens. It's very like the Catskills in America. It was frequented by a certain demographic back in the 60s and 70s. I don't know what it's like now. I know it's very misty and it can be very, very cold. You talk hamburgers. My quest, aside from pangolin, not to eat but to see, is slap chips. And I don't know if he was an editor. I know he was a writer at the Saturday Star, and that was Victor Strugo. He and I were going to don tuxedos, get into a limousine, and drive around Johannesburg looking for the ideal slap chips. We didn't get that far. It was just too much of an effort. But and I should imagine your burgers are much like that. There are people who will tell you where to go, because as a child they were taken there, and they still remember the taste of either, in your case, the burger, or in my case, the slap chips.
Yeah.
I think there's a story there, David. The 21st story: how to find good South African food.
Well, Jacques Marais, an acquaintance of mine who's a great photographer and adventure sportsman, he's on the search for the perfect pie.
We should get together. We should collaborate, the three of us, and we can head off in different directions. And hey, who knows? David, where to next for you? Is there when you wake up in the morning, do you have to sit down at your laptop and put fingers to keypad to fill pages now for the next book, or are you just sort of taking a break and see what happens?
No, I'm always on the next project.
Right.
In fact, I'm 6 projects ahead. Well, no, I'm 6 projects behind.
Yeah.
So I'm finishing writing in the first draft next stories from the felt.
Mm.
It's environmental stories that, again, I'd like to think there'll be a lot of unexpected, unusual stuff, but one can't avoid the plastic and the river pollution and the sewage.
Right.
So I have to go into that, and I do. But I happen to be, one of my hats has got environmental science written on it. So again, I've got the benefit of having not so much the knowledge, but I know who to talk to and what questions to ask to get deep information about. Okay, this is the best one: power. So my story starts. There's a lovely John Steinbeck book called The Short Reign of Pippin the Fourth.
Mm.
It's about a guy in Paris, and he wakes up in the morning and he's about to jump on his Vespa to go and buy croissants for breakfast at the local boulangerie, when the telephone rings. Tring, 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 tring. Bonjour, Monsieur Astel. And they say, well, it's the French Parliament here, and the people have decided they're sick of this democracy thing. They want the king back. And they've traced he's the direct descendant of Charlemagne. So they want to make him king. And he says, yeah, I'll be king. He thinks of all the good stuff he could get done that, the stupid bureaucrats are not getting done.
Yeah.
But he discovers very quickly that it's a lousy job. And no matter what you do, you can't do it right. So my story about power generation starts with you wake up in the morning, you, David Bristow, and the telephone rings. Tring, tring. And it's guy from Eskom or Energy Department saying, David Bristow, we're in a terrible bind. Our energy supply system is shot, but we've been following your blogs and your writing, and we think you are the guy for the job. We want you to run the power supply department for South Africa and get it working properly. And then I lay out what the options are. So you start with coal, and you go through nuclear and fracking and solar and wind and everything has got a cost and a benefit. Yeah. And unless you go very deeply into them, they're not always obvious. And I'll be very controversial here. Fracking would probably be the most cost-effective, least environmentally impactful solution to our current energy problems. In fact, without a doubt. There's no doubt. In fact, if you look at what it's done in America and Canada, it's reinvigorated their economies and made America, United States of America, a net exporter of fossil fuels. But there's the rub. It's still a fossil fuel.
Yeah.
But you want to screw up the Karoo, where only 15% of the population lives, to give power to the other, to the whole 100%? Would you say, no, let's hold off. Let's struggle for another 10 years until we get reusables online in a big way? Well, when there's a political situation where people in the townships are chomping at the bit and getting revolting, and your power base is at risk, what are you going to do? The solutions are very complicated.
Yeah.
So I try and go into that kind of level of thinking. Here are the options. What would you do?
I wouldn't take the job. David, are people able to buy your books currently?
Sure. Books, all the independent bookstores. I know Joburg love books. There's Scoobs in northern what we used to call Four Ways.
Yeah.
Witkoppen, bro. Witkoppen.
Okay.
Where I grew up.
Where you grew up. So that's all available there.
And online.
Okay.
So you can buy it on Amazon or Exclusive Books website. There's about 3 or 4 websites where they're available. Yeah.
Okay, great stuff. David, thank you so much for chatting to me. It's been an absolute gas. I hope the next book is as commercially successful as the others have been, and if not more so, because I think people are hopefully reading a little bit more rather than watching mindless reruns of Let's Build a Car or something like that. Please send my very best regards to everybody down at Marina de Gama, those who know me, and you can even tell those who don't know me about me. Thanks very much for joining me on Travel and Things today.
Thanks, other DB.